Welcome back to the channel. With the X-Men 97 series receiving high praise for its revival of the classic 90s animated show, and the characters gradually being implemented into the ongoing Marvel Cinematic Universe, the mutant superheroes seem to be having a resurgence in mainstream media lately. With that being said, here is our list of the top 10 X-Men video games. Number 10. Marvel's Midnight Suns, 2022. Marvel's Midnight Suns told a supernatural story in which a legendary demon slayer known as the Hunter must team up with various Marvel heroes to stop the Mother of Demons, Lilith, from fulfilling an ancient prophecy. While it wasn't an X-Men game and instead focused on horror hero icons like Ghost Rider or Blade, Midnight Suns did feature some mutant characters in its roster. Wolverine and Scarlet Witch were present alongside the New Mutants Magic in the main campaign, with Storm being added in the game's Bloodstorm DLC and Deadpool in its The Good, the Bad, and the Undead DLC. Marvel's Midnight Suns featured tactical RPG gameplay from the creators of the XCOM series, setting it apart from other AAA Marvel titles. Departing from the combat seen in many other games on this list, Marvel's Midnight Suns was turn-based, allowing players to assemble up to 3 heroes at a time to take on intricately arranged scenarios, with a card-based mechanic seeing players unlocking new abilities to use as the game went on. Number 9. Marvel Ultimate Alliance, 2006. Marvel Ultimate Alliance took the gameplay of the acclaimed X-Men Legends games, more on them later, and expanded it to include heroes from all across the Marvel Universe. In a story that saw the heroes taking on Doctor Doom and his Masters of Evil, players could assemble their own teams, with characters from the X-Men, Avengers, Fantastic Four, and more, and selecting certain teams from the comics would grant certain buffs. Marvel Ultimate Alliance went on to have 2 well-received sequels, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, which served more as a continuation of the characters seen in the first game, and adapted the then-recent Civil War storyline from the comics, and Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, The Black Order, which aligned more with the MCU's versions of the characters, barring the X-Men and Fantastic Four, who had yet to be introduced to Marvel Studios' continuity, and the movie's storyline at the time with the heroes teaming up to take on Thanos and his Black Order. Number 8. X-Men Origins, Wolverine, Uncaged Edition, 2009. Fox's X-Men movies are the definition of a mixed bag, and the same can be said for their video game adaptations. 2006's X-Men. The official game spreads itself a bit too thin to be worthwhile, although a few of the playable characters are fun, Nightcrawler especially. Still, this tie-in is difficult to recommend to anyone but the most die-hard fans of the original film trilogy. Even then, they should treat it as only a curiosity. X-Men Origins. Wolverine is a top contender for the worst film in the franchise, although it has stiff competition from Dark Phoenix and the New Mutants. The movie was so terrible, many people simply assumed the game version would not be worth anything, especially since the late 2000s were packed to the brim with terrible adaptations of blockbusters. However, incredibly, the game ended up being far better than the source material, depending on the version. Number 7. X-Men vs. Street Fighter, 1996. Following the success of X-Men, Children of the Atom and Marvel superheroes, Capcom eventually created X-Men vs. Street Fighter, a 2D crossover fighting game that pitted famous Capcom fighters such as Ryu, Chun-Li, and Zangief against Wolverine, Storm, and Juggernaut. Players form a team of 2 characters from the X-Men and Street Fighter roster, and during matches, players can tag their characters in and out. The game's tag team mechanic allowed players to pull off a variety of long combo strings and team combos, which made each match feel different and engaging. While overshadowed by Marvel vs. Capcom, X-Men vs. Street Fighter is just as good as the first entry in that series, and an argument could be made that it is even better. The gameplay still holds up today, and the roster was impressive and serves as a fun showcase of X-Men's status in the 90s. Number 6. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, 2000. Since its release in 2000, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is widely regarded as the peak of Capcom's work on the franchise, and the last 2D entry produced. The fighting title had an impressive roster of 56 characters comprised of those from Capcom's own franchises, completely original characters, and several from the Marvel Universe. These featured several X-Men who were extremely popular in the 90s, such as Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops, Gambit, Cable, and Rogue, and several of their most iconic foes like Magneto, Sabretooth, and even a playable Sentinel. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was included in the Xbox Live Arcade on Xbox 360 and PlayStation Store on PlayStation 3, making it available to modern audiences. This was only for a brief time, however, as it was pulled in 2013 following the apparent expiration of Capcom's licensing contract with Marvel Comics, and has been stuck in legal limbo ever since, with many fans being vocal about their desire to see the franchise return. Number 5. X-Men, Genesis 1993. 1993 saw the release of X-Men on the Sega Genesis, which was quickly classified as one of the hardest X-Men games ever played. That's saying a lot, considering Spider-Man and the X-Men. Arcade's revenge exists, but it's the truth. Players could choose Cyclops, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, or Gambit to move through the difficult levels with a quickly dwindling mutant power bar. The game even featured a rare ending that required players to lightly hit the reset button, going against years of warnings against doing that exact thing. X-Men can be difficult to revisit in this day and age due to an overabundance of difficulty spikes and stiff platforming controls that make most stages frustrating rather than challenging. However, the game has positives as well. While sharing many similarities, the playable characters have unique moves that set them apart from the crowd, and they are brought to life well by generally solid animation. X-Men looks pretty good for its era, and that goes beyond just the heroes and villains. There are also a few neat touches that might delight fans. For instance, if a character falls off a stage, they are brought back to life by Jean Grey. Number 4. X-Men 2, Clone Wars, 1995. X-Men 2. Clone Wars was Sega's follow-up to their popular but difficult X-Men, and featured new playable characters as well as fixed a number of the glaring issues seen in the first game. The sequel added Psylocke, Beast, and an unlockable Magneto to the playable roster from the first game, though the other X-Men continued to appear throughout the game. X-Men 2, Clone Wars loosely adapted the Phalanx Covenant storyline for the game and had one of the best game soundtracks of the era. The sequel was made infinitely more enjoyable thanks to the removal of the mutant power bar that had hindered the first game. Number 3. X-Men, Children of the Atom, 1994. The first game from Capcom to feature the X-Men characters was called X-Men, Children of the Atom, and it launched the franchise's eventual future success with games like X-Men vs. Street Fighter and the Marvel vs. Capcom series. The game was loosely based on the Fatal Attraction storyline from the comics, and featured the standard playable roster alongside villains like Omega Red, Spiral, Silver Samurai, and even a Sentinel. Capcom also included Akuma from the Street Fighter franchise as a secret character in the game. While it does not hold up quite as much as some latter Capcom fighting games featuring Marvel characters, Children of the Atom is still a landmark release that set the stage for greatness to come, all the while still being a fun time in its own right. Number 2. X-Men, Mutant Apocalypse, 1994. Capcom developed and published the side-scrolling beat-em-up game X-Men Mutant Apocalypse for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1994. In Mutant Apocalypse, players control 5 of the X-Men: Beast, Cyclops, Gambit, Psylocke, and Wolverine, each with their own objectives, moves, and abilities. The story featured iconic locations such as the Genosha Island Complex, Magneto's Avalon Space Station on Asteroid M, and the Danger Room, with several of the X-Men's most major foes making an appearance. Unlike some of the other titles featured on this list, X-Men Mutant Apocalypse didn't get a re-release on modern consoles, despite its acclaim and general popularity. Fortunately, it is one of the 8 X-Men titles from the 90s and 2000s included in Arcade 1UP's X-Men 97 arcade cabinet, suggesting that a modern port exists and may come to other platforms at a later date. Number 1. X-Men, the arcade game, 1992. Konami's arcade title, The Uncanny X-Men, later referred to as X-Men, the arcade game, or simply X-Men Arcade, saw up to 6 players teaming up to take on Magneto, and was extremely successful in the United States upon its release in 1992. The roster included 6 playable X-Men: Cyclops, Colossus, Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler, and Dazzler, and saw them battle iconic villains such as Juggernaut, Pyro, Blob, Mystique, and Emma Frost, aka the White Queen, with designs based on the 1989 cartoon pilot, X-Men, Pride of the X-Men. Despite it never launching its intended series, with the unrelated X-Men, the animated series releasing years later. I hope you enjoyed our top 10 X-Men games. Leave a comment below for any games you think should have made the list. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Vault of Epic Facts channel.